All right, so today we're going to start with Judaism. So we are now starting the second half of our course, moving away from the Eastern traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism and moving on to the Western religions that we call the Western traditions, our Western monotheisms, which we'll talk more about in a minute. So we're moving west from Asia, right? All three of the religious traditions that we're going to do from here on out, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all originate in the Middle East. So that's their birthplace. And you've probably maybe heard a bit about Judaism, or you may know a bit about Judaism already. And most people know what I already mentioned, which is that it's monotheistic. So Judaism worships one God. There's one capital G God. That God is omniscient, therefore all knowing, omnipotent, which means all powerful, and all good. That God, that divinity, is a wholly good or completely good God. This is called ethical monotheism, and Judaism, one of Judaism's great gifts to the world, is this concept of ethical monotheism. There were, of course, beliefs in a central God or a high God before Judaism, but oftentimes that God was not necessarily seen to be completely good. So that's one of the differences that Judaism has to the surrounding religious traditions in its day. And we start with Judaism for a couple of reasons. The first one is that, of course, it starts chronologically before Christianity and Islam. So, Christianity comes after the beginning of Judaism, and Islam comes after the beginning of both Judaism and Christianity. We also start with Judaism because it's really impossible to understand Christianity or Islam without first having a solid understanding of Judaism. Christianity and Islam don't just start after Judaism, they are the spiritual inheritors of Judaism. So they take this core concept of an ethical theism, they take many of the other beliefs and traditions and texts of Judaism, and they use those as a foundation for their own religious tradition. Christianity is intimately connected to Judaism because the founder of Christianity, or the person upon whom Christianity is based, Jesus, was a Jewish man. Right? He was raised Jewish, raised, studying the Jewish sacred texts. That's the religious tradition that he lived during his lifetime. So it's impossible to understand a lot of his teachings, a lot of his sayings, unless you understand the Judaism, especially the Judaism of his time, of his day. And Islam sees itself as the continuation and completion of the religious story that starts with Judaism and moves through Christianity and then eventually gets to Islam. So really having a solid understanding of Judaism is very important for understanding both Christianity and Islam, which together they're the two most popular religious traditions in the entire world. More than half of the people on earth are either Christian or Muslim. So it is very important to understand both of those traditions, and it's impossible to understand them without a solid, a deep understanding of Judaism. And because of this influence, this incredible influence that Judaism has on the world, we do include it in our world religions course, even though by comparison it's much, much smaller in terms of numbers than any of the other traditions that we're studying. Right? Hinduism has almost 1 billion adherents. Buddhism has almost 500 million. Then when Christianity and Islam are both in the around 2 billion adherents each. And Judaism, if you've started the reading, you know that Judaism is actually only about 14 million people. So comparatively, it is very, very, very small. It's very tiny. But we do still study it because it has influenced these two great traditions of the world, Christianity and Islam. And I use great in terms of their numbers, right? The largest religious traditions in our world. So Judaism has profoundly shaped the world in which we live by passing on many religious and spiritual concepts that were later taken up by Christianity and Islam. Which is not, of course, to say that it is important to study in its own right, that this is an important religious tradition for us to understand. And with that in mind, we can look at the quote that I have here for Judaism, which says, "Pray as if everything depends on God, act as if everything depends on ourselves." So you can see a little bit of a glimpse into what Judaism is about. This is a quote from the Torah, from the sacred text of Judaism. It's also a text that is really kind of interwoven into Jewish life, in prayer, in song, sometimes often on the decorations in temples and synagogues. So it's an important quote. It's a phrase that is often heard or read or studied in Jewish life. And you can see there, for one, we have this capital G God, right? Pray as if everything depends on God. So there is a belief in a high God, in a central or singular God, right? There's only one God of the world, and everything depends on that God. So the God of Judaism is powerful, and he also has an intimate connection with the world. So this is not a deity who just creates the world and then takes a step back. This is a God who has a relationship with his people and is deeply concerned with what happens to human beings on this planet, in this world. And prayer is a central act of communication with that God. So in Judaism, you pray as if everything depends on God, right? You trust that God is in control, and that everything that happens in the world is somehow connected to God. But you act as if everything depends on you, as if everything depends on ourselves. So Judaism, as we'll see, also has this very strong ethical component in terms of improving the world, to leave the world better than the one that you were born into. So we'll see this connects to a central concept in Judaism about repairing the world. That in Judaism, there is this high God that is in control of everything, but that doesn't mean that you can just sit back and let whatever's going to happen happen. It means that you were given a gift, which is the creation of this world, and therefore you have a central role to play in making this world a better place. Judaism has a very high priority of improving one's community, of showing justice in the world, of being sort of a beacon of love and justice in the world. So you have to act as if everything depends on you. You cannot leave things up to God. The notion of an all-powerful and all-good God is never supposed to lead to complacency, right? Well, I don't need to help that person, because if God wanted that person to have good things, then God would make that happen. That is absolutely not an acceptable attitude in Judaism, right? God created the world and created this situation. That means that it is your responsibility to make the ethical action and to help improve the world whenever and wherever you can. Okay, so those are just kind of some short pieces on an introduction to Judaism. So now we're going to move on to sort of a general historical overview of some of the major events and phases in the history of Judaism.